Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance watching the stars through the main window. The year was 2387 and humanity had spread across 17 star systems like seeds in the wind. His ship moved slowly through the Kepler 442 system doing routine checks on empty planets that might become new homes for humans someday. The work was boring but important, and Jake had done it for 12 years without complaint. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at her station monitoring radio signals from nearby space. She was young with bright eyes and always eager to find something new in the endless darkness between stars. Today she frowned at her screen because strange signals were coming from somewhere far away. The sounds were not like anything humans had ever heard before, and they carried a feeling that made her skin crawl with worry. Amy turned to Jake and said the signals were getting stronger every hour. She played the recordings through the bridge. Speakers and everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. The voices were deep and harsh, speaking in patterns that sounded angry and demanding. Even though nobody could understand the words, the meaning seemed clear enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Chief Engineer Ben Carter was a big man with steady hands who had fixed every kind of machine humans had ever built. He heard the alien voices and immediately went to work boosting the ship's sensors to see farther into space. What he found made his blood run cold because hundreds of massive ships were heading toward human space, moving faster than anything should be able to move. The alien fleet was enormous, with ships that looked like they were built for war and nothing else. Their hulls were black and covered with weapons that glowed with strange energy. Jake had never seen anything like them in all his years exploring space, but he knew they meant trouble for every human alive. Jake ordered Amy to send an emergency message to Earth Station Alpha, where Admiral Lisa Thompson commanded all human defense forces. The message would take hours to reach her, but every minute counted now because the alien ships were moving toward the outer colonies where millions of people lived in peace. Not knowing death was coming for them, Admiral Thompson was a tough woman who had served in space for 30 years and had seen every kind of crisis humans could face. When she got Jake's message, she felt her heart sink because the alien fleet was bigger than all human military forces combined. The weapons those ships carried could probably destroy entire planets, and there was no way to stop them with what humans had built so far. The aliens called themselves the Fourth Empire, and they had been conquering other species for over 1,000 years. Commander Zeph Kaller led their advanced fleet, and he looked at reports about humans with the same interest he might show for insects. To him, humans were just another weak young race that would either serve the Empire as slaves or die fighting a battle. They could never win. The Vorth had conquered over 200 different species across the galaxy, and none had ever given them real trouble. They had weapons that could cut through any armor humans had ever made, and shields that could stop the biggest explosions human ships could create. Their soldiers were bigger and stronger than humans, and they had machines in their bodies that made them even more dangerous in battle. News of the coming invasion spread across human space faster than the alien ships could travel. Some colonies panicked and tried to run away to hiding places among distant stars. Others began preparing for war even though they knew they had no chance against such powerful enemies. Parents held their children closer and wondered if tomorrow would come at all. President Daniel Hayes called together the leaders of all human worlds and told them that humanity would not surrender without a fight. He said that freedom was worth dying for, and that even if humans lost the war, they would make the aliens pay a price they would never forget. His words were broadcast to every human settlement, and they gave people courage to face the darkness. Ahead, Jake Morrison kept his ship in the Kepler system, watching the alien fleet grow larger on his screens. He knew that soon those ships would reach the first human colonies and the war would begin. He thought about his wife and daughter back on Earth and wondered if he would ever see them again. But he also knew that someone had to watch the enemy and send reports back to the fleet so Admiral Thompson could plan the defense of human space. The Defiance was just one small ship against an empire that had never lost a war, but Jake would do his duty no matter what happened. He looked at his crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that burned in his own heart. They were afraid, but they were also angry, and that anger would have to be enough to get them through what was coming. The quiet time was ending, and soon the galaxy would learn what humans could do when they were fighting for everything they loved. The Vorth fleet reached New Geneva Colony just as the morning sun was rising over the main city where 2 million humans lived and worked in peace. Governor Helen Brooks stood in her office watching the alien ships fill the sky like a black cloud that blocked out the light. Her hands shook as she read the surrender message that came down from the lead ship demanding that all humans lay down their weapons and prepare for slavery. Helen had been governor for 8 years and had always tried to solve problems with words instead of violence. But she knew that surrendering to the Vorth meant watching her people become slaves or worse, and she could not let that happen. She sent a message back to the alien commander telling him that New Geneva would never surrender and that if he wanted the colony he would have to take it by force. The first Vorth attack came from orbit as energy beams struck the defense stations around the colony. The human weapons were not strong enough to hurt the alien ships, but they fired anyway because giving up was not in their nature. 3 small Vorth scout ships came down to look at the defenses, and the humans managed to destroy them with missiles. Before they could escape back to the fleet, Marine Colonel Pete Williams had 5,000 soldiers to defend a colony that was built for peace and not for war. The men and women under his command were brave, but they had weapons that seemed like toys compared to what the aliens carried. When the first Vorth soldiers landed outside the city, Pete could see they were 7 feet tall with armor that glowed. With energy and guns that could cut through solid steel, the battle for the city streets lasted 3 days, and every hour brought new horrors. The Vorth soldiers were stronger and better armed than humans, but Pete noticed something important during the fighting. The aliens always did exactly what their commanders told them to do, and they never changed their plans even when those plans were not working. Humans were different because they could think of new ideas in the middle of battle and try things that nobody had ever tried before. Dr. Susan Clark was trapped in the colony's medical center when the fighting started, and she spent her time studying the bodies of dead Vorth soldiers that were brought in by human troops. What she found amazed and frightened her because the aliens had machines built into their bodies that made them faster and stronger than any natural creature could be. But the machines also made them dependent on technology in ways that might be used against them. Susan discovered that the Vorth could not function properly if their body machines were damaged or stopped working. She also learned that they had never fought an enemy that was as creative and unpredictable as humans seemed to be when they were desperate. Every other species the Vorth had conquered had tried to fight them the same way the aliens fought, but humans did things that made no sense and somehow made those crazy ideas work. On the second day of battle, Pete Williams led a group of Marines in an attack on a Vorth command post that should have been impossible to capture. Instead of attacking from the front like the aliens expected, the humans came through the sewers under the building and used explosive charges to bring down the whole structure. The Vorth inside were killed not by superior weapons but by tons of falling concrete and steel. Captain Julie Barnes commanded the light cruiser UES Retribution, and she arrived at New Geneva just as the colony was about to fall. Her ship was too small to fight the main Vorth fleet, but she could attack their supply ships and transports that were bringing more soldiers down to the planet. Julie used the asteroid belt around New Geneva to hide her ship and strike at the aliens when they were not expecting trouble. The Retribution would appear suddenly behind a Vorth transport and destroy it with missiles before disappearing back into the rocks where the bigger alien ships could not follow. Julie's crew learned to use their smaller size and faster speed to hit the enemy and run away before they could fight back. It was not the kind of glorious battle that people wrote songs about, but it worked, and every enemy ship they destroyed meant fewer soldiers fighting on the planet below. Governor Brooks died on the 3rd day when a Vorth energy beam hit the government building where she was trying to coordinate the defense. Her last message to the surviving colonists was simple and clear: make them pay for every step they take and never stop fighting no matter what happens. Those words spread through the human defenders like fire and gave them strength to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. The battle ended when Colonel Williams and his last 100 Marines were finally overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. But the Vorth had expected to capture New Geneva in a few hours with minimal losses. Instead, they had spent 3 days fighting for every building and lost over 1,000 soldiers to an enemy they had thought would surrender without a real fight. Videos of human soldiers making impossible stands against overwhelming odds were recorded by news cameras and spread across human space faster than the Vorth could stop them. People on every human world saw their brothers and sisters fighting and dying with courage that seemed to come from something deeper than training or duty. The images made humans angry in a way they had never been angry before. The fall of New Geneva was a defeat for humanity, but it was also the moment when humans realized they could hurt their enemies and make them bleed. The war was just beginning, and already the Vorth were learning that conquering humanity would not be as easy as they had thought. 6 months had passed since the Vorth Empire first attacked. Human space and 12 colonies had fallen to the alien war machine. But something strange was happening that Commander Zeth Kaller could not understand because the humans were not behaving like any enemy the Vorth had ever faced before. Instead of becoming weaker after each defeat, the humans seemed to be getting stronger and more dangerous with every battle they lost. General Chris Parker had been put in charge of all human military forces after the old command structure proved too slow to deal with the Vorth threat. He was a man who thought about war like it was a puzzle that could be solved if you looked at all the pieces long enough. Chris spent his days studying reports from every battle and slowly began to see patterns that gave him hope for the first time. Since the war began, the Vorth were excellent at fighting the kind of wars they had always fought against enemies who used the same tactics and strategies that the aliens expected. But humans did not fight the way the Vorth thought they should fight. And this was causing problems for the alien commanders who had never dealt with such unpredictable opponents before. Chris realized that humanity's greatest strength was not better weapons or stronger soldiers, but the ability to do things that nobody expected. Engineer Roy Davis worked in a secret laboratory deep underground on Earth studying pieces of destroyed Vorth ships and weapons that had been recovered from battle sites. What he learned made him smile for the first time since the war started because the alien technology had weaknesses that could be used against them. The Vorth energy weapons were powerful, but they were designed to fight other energy weapons and they did not work as well against simple kinetic projectiles. Roy began developing new weapons that used Vorth power cells to fire metal slugs at incredible speeds instead of trying to match the aliens' energy beams. The result was devastating because Vorth shields were designed to stop energy attacks and they could not handle solid projectiles moving at such high velocities. Human soldiers began carrying weapons that could punch through Vorth armor like it was made of paper. Dr. Linda Martinez led a team of scientists who were studying captured Vorth soldiers and equipment to learn everything they could about alien biology and technology. What they discovered was even more important than new weapons because it revealed a fatal weakness in the enemy that no one had noticed before. The machines built into Vorth bodies made them stronger, but they also made them vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses that could shut down their enhanced abilities. Linda and her team worked day and night to create portable devices that could generate the right kind of electromagnetic field to disrupt Vorth body machines. The devices were small enough for human soldiers to carry into battle and powerful enough to leave alien warriors helpless and confused when their technological advantages were suddenly taken away from them. The first real test of these new tactics came at Freedom Station, which was one of the most important industrial centers in human space. Commander Scott Johnson was in charge of defending the station with only 2,000 Marines against a Vorth fleet that carried 20,000 soldiers. Every military expert said the station could not be held, but Scott had spent months preparing for this battle, and he had ideas that would surprise the aliens. Freedom Station was built around asteroid mining operations, and it had huge industrial machines that could be turned into weapons if someone was creative enough to figure out how. Scott and his engineers spent weeks setting traps throughout the station using mining explosives and industrial equipment in ways they were never meant to be used. When the Vorth ships arrived, they expected to find a normal military base, but instead they found something that had been turned into a giant death trap. The aliens followed their standard procedure for capturing space stations by sending boarding parties to secure key areas before bringing in their main forces. But when the Vorth soldiers entered the station, they found themselves fighting in corridors that had been rigged with explosives and moving through rooms where industrial machines had been turned into automated weapons that fired from unexpected directions. Scott used the station's communication system to coordinate his defense in ways that confused the alien commanders, who were used to fighting enemies with rigid command structures. Human soldiers would retreat from one area only to appear somewhere else and attack from behind using routes through maintenance tunnels and service areas that the Vorth had not even known existed. The electromagnetic pulse devices worked even better than Dr. Martinez had hoped, because when Vorth soldiers had their body machines shut down, they became weak and slow compared to humans who were fighting for their lives. The aliens found themselves losing battles they should have won easily because their technological advantages had been taken away by human ingenuity and determination. The battle for Freedom Station lasted 2 weeks and ended when the surviving Vorth forces retreated back to their ships and left the system entirely. It was the first time in over 1,000 years that a Vorth attack had been completely defeated, and news of the victory spread through human space like wildfire. People who had been hiding in fear began to believe that maybe the war could be won after all. Commander Zeth Kaller reported the defeat to his superiors and received orders that made him uncomfortable because the Vorth High Command was becoming frustrated with the slow progress of the conquest. They ordered him to begin targeting civilian populations to break human morale, but Zeth Kaller had studied humans long enough to suspect that attacking civilians would only make them fight harder. The victory at Freedom Station marked the beginning of a new phase in the war, where humans stopped running from the Vorth and started hunting them instead. 1 year into the war, both humans and Vorth had been changed by the fighting in ways that neither side had expected when the conflict began. The Vorth Empire that had conquered the galaxy through quick, decisive victories now found itself locked in a grinding battle against an enemy that refused to surrender and seemed to become more dangerous every day. Their casualties were mounting, and their commanders were starting to question whether humans could ever be defeated using traditional methods. Captain Tony Mitchell commanded a group of fast attack ships that the human fleet called ghost ships, because they appeared without warning at Vorth positions and disappeared before the enemy could respond effectively. These ships were crewed entirely by volunteers who had lost everything to the war and had nothing left except their desire to make the aliens pay for what they had done to human colonies. Tony had lost his family when the Vorth destroyed his home world, and the pain of that loss had turned him into something that even scared his own crew sometimes. He led his ships in attacks that seemed suicidal but somehow worked, because the Vorth could never predict what humans would do. When they were driven by rage and desperation instead of logic and military doctrine, the ghost ships used tactics that no sane military commander would approve of under normal circumstances. They would hide in comet tails and asteroid fields, waiting for Vorth patrols to pass close enough to attack. When they struck, it was with overwhelming firepower, concentrated in a few seconds of violence that left enemy ships crippled or destroyed. Before they could even identify their attackers, Commander Zeth Kaller was growing desperate as his superiors demanded faster progress in conquering human space. The war that was supposed to last a few months had dragged on for over a year, and the Vorth High Command was beginning to question his abilities as a military leader. In his frustration, Zeth Kaller made a decision that would prove to be the biggest mistake of his career. The Vorth began targeting civilian populations, hoping to break human morale and force a surrender. They attacked mining stations and agricultural colonies that had no military value except as places where innocent people lived and worked. Zeth Kaller thought that seeing their families killed would make human soldiers lose the will to fight, but he had badly misjudged how humans would react to such attacks. Instead of surrendering, the human colonies began evacuating their civilian populations while converting their industrial facilities into weapons factories. Every human world became a potential fortress where ordinary citizens worked around the clock to build weapons and equipment for the military forces that were fighting to protect them. The attacks on civilians had united humanity in a way that nothing else could have. Accomplished Dr. Nancy Green was a psychologist who studied alien behavior, and she made an important discovery about Vorth society that changed how humans understood their enemy. The alien empire was built around a cybernetic network that connected every Vorth soldier and commander to a central command system that made all important decisions. This gave them perfect coordination, but it also meant they could not function independently when their communications were disrupted. Nancy worked with human military leaders to develop new strategies based on this weakness, and the results were devastating to Vorth operations across human space. When human forces began targeting Vorth communication nodes, entire alien fleets would become paralyzed as their soldiers waited for orders that never came because the command network had been severed. The war reached a turning point when Admiral Lisa Thompson decided that humanity could not win by playing defense forever. She began planning Operation Prometheus, which would be a massive, coordinated attack on the Vorth command ship that controlled the entire invasion force. It was a desperate plan that would require sacrifices that tested the very limits of human courage, but Thompson knew it might be their only chance to end the war. The operation required volunteers for what was essentially a suicide mission because the Vorth command ship was protected by hundreds of smaller vessels and had weapons powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. But when Thompson asked for volunteers, she was overwhelmed by the response because thousands of human soldiers stepped forward, eager for a chance to strike back at the heart of the alien war machine. Colonel Kevin Brown was chosen to lead the assault team because he had survived more battles against the Vorth than any other human soldier, and he understood their tactics better than anyone. Kevin had seen too many friends die in the war, and he knew that Operation Prometheus was probably going to be his last battle, but he was determined to make it count for something important. The plan called for the human fleet to attack the Vorth forces from multiple directions, while a small team of elite soldiers would infiltrate the command ship and disable its control systems. If they succeeded, the entire Vorth invasion force would lose coordination and become vulnerable to human attacks. If they failed, the war would probably be lost because humanity was running out of ships and soldiers to continue the fight. Tony Mitchell and his ghost ships would play a crucial role in the operation by creating diversions that would draw Vorth defenders away from the main assault. It was exactly the kind of dangerous mission that his crews had been training for during their months of hit and run attacks against enemy positions throughout human space. As the human fleet prepared for Operation Prometheus, everyone involved knew they were about to risk everything on a single desperate gamble. But they also knew that this was what humans did best, because when faced with impossible odds, they found ways to do things that should have been impossible and somehow made them work through determination and sacrifice. The stage was set for the battle that would decide whether humanity would survive as a free people or disappear into slavery under the Vorth Empire. The assault on the Vorth command ship began at dawn on the anniversary of the war's first battle, when human forces struck from every direction at once in a coordinated attack that caught the aliens completely off guard. Admiral Thompson had committed every available ship to Operation Prometheus, knowing that if the plan failed, there would be nothing left to defend human space from complete conquest by the Empire. Colonel Kevin Brown led his assault team through a gap in the Vorth defenses created by Tony Mitchell's ghost ships, which had sacrificed themselves to clear a path to the massive alien vessel. The command ship was larger than most human cities, with weapons that could destroy planets and armor that had never been penetrated by any enemy the Vorth had faced in over 1,000 years of conquest. Kevin's team consisted of 50 volunteers who knew they were probably going to die, but were determined to take as many aliens with them as possible. They had trained for months learning how to fight inside Vorth ships, using captured equipment and intelligence gathered from previous battles. Each soldier carried enough weapons and explosives to level a city block because subtlety was not going to work against an enemy that was stronger and better armed than humans. The infiltration of the command ship turned into the most savage fighting of the entire war as human soldiers faced elite Vorth warriors in corridors and chambers designed for beings much larger than humans. The aliens had every advantage except the desperate fury that drove the human attackers forward even when they were wounded and outnumbered by opponents who should have been able to kill them easily. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Stone led a diversionary attack that drew thousands of Vorth defenders away from the ship's critical systems. Her team of 200 Marines held off wave after wave of alien soldiers in a running battle through the ship's lower levels that lasted for hours. They used captured Vorth weapons and improvised explosives to turn every corridor into a killing ground where the aliens paid in blood for every step they took. Dr. Linda Martinez and her technical team followed behind the assault forces, working frantically to disable the ship's command networks while the soldiers held off the Vorth defenders. The alien computer systems were unlike anything humans had ever seen, but Linda had spent months studying captured Vorth technology, and she knew enough to cause serious damage if she could reach the right control centers. The battle reached its climax when Commander Zethkaller himself entered the fight, leading his personal guard in an attempt to stop the human assault before it could reach the ship's core systems. The alien commander was enhanced with the finest cybernetic implants the Vorth Empire could provide, and he seemed unstoppable as he cut through human defenders with weapons that could slice through steel armor like paper. Colonel Brown faced Zethkaller in single combat while his team continued their mission to destroy the command ship's control systems. The alien was faster and stronger than any human could be naturally, but Kevin had spent years fighting the Vorth, and he had learned that their greatest strength could also be their weakness if you were clever enough to exploit it properly. When direct attacks failed to hurt the alien commander, Kevin did something that no Vorth warrior would ever consider because it violated every principle of honorable combat that the Empire had followed for centuries. He destroyed his own weapon to bring down a support beam that crushed both of them under tons of metal and debris from the ship's superstructure. As Kevin lay dying under the wreckage, he could hear the sounds of human weapons firing throughout the ship, and he knew that his sacrifice had given Dr. Martinez the time she needed to reach the command center. The alien networks began shutting down one by one as Linda's team worked to disable every system they could find while Vorth defenders tried desperately to stop them. The moment the command ship's control networks failed, every human ship and colony in space received the same message that spread through human space faster than light itself. The Vorth command vessel was burning and the alien fleet was losing coordination as their cybernetic command structure collapsed under the damage inflicted by a handful of human soldiers who had given their lives to strike at the heart of the Empire. What followed was not celebration, but something far more terrifying to the Vorth because it was coordinated human fury unleashed across dozens of star systems at exactly the same time. Every human force that had been waiting for this moment attacked. Every Vorth position they could reach with a rage that came from years of watching their people die at the hands of alien invaders. Human forces that had been hiding and running for over a year suddenly emerged from asteroid belts and nebulae to strike at Vorth supply lines and reinforcement fleets. The attacks were not carefully planned military operations, but expressions of pure human anger directed against an enemy that had pushed them too far and would now pay the price for underestimating what humans could do when they stopped holding back. The Vorth Empire had conquered over 200 species in their expansion across the galaxy, but they had never faced anything like the coordinated assault that hit them from every direction as human forces attacked with weapons that should not have been able to hurt them and tactics that made no sense according to any military doctrine the aliens understood. For the first time in their long history, the Vorth began to retreat from battles they should have won easily. Their command structure was in chaos and their soldiers were demoralized by fighting an enemy that seemed to become stronger every time they were hurt. The Empire that had never known defeat was learning what it meant to face humans who had nothing left to lose. As Vorth ships fled from human space carrying news of their defeat back to the Empire's homeworlds, The survivors of Operation Prometheus realized they had accomplished something that would be remembered for as long as humans existed. They had proven that even the mightiest empire in the galaxy could be brought down by ordinary people who refused to surrender their freedom. 3 years after the first Vorth ship had entered human space, the last alien vessel limped away from the outer colonies carrying the survivors of an empire that had never known defeat until they met humanity. The war was over, but the victory had cost more than anyone had imagined when the fighting began, because dozens of human worlds lay in ruins and millions of people were dead or missing from the conflict that had changed everything. President Daniel Hayes stood before the cameras for the last time as leader of the Human Federation because the weight of wartime decisions had aged him beyond his years, and he knew it was time for younger people to guide humanity into whatever future awaited them among the stars. He spoke not of glory or conquest, but of the price that had been paid for freedom and the responsibility that came with being the species that had defeated the Vorth Empire. The heroes who returned from the war found that home had changed as much as they had during the years of fighting and killing that had transformed ordinary people into legends. Admiral Jake Morrison, who had sent the first warning about the Vorth invasion, now commanded the entire human fleet, but he struggled to find purpose in peacetime. After years of constant warfare against enemies who wanted to destroy everything he loved, many veterans discovered that the skills that had kept them alive during the war did not translate well to civilian life in a galaxy where humans were no longer fighting for survival. Colonel Pete Williams spent his time helping to rebuild the colonies that had been destroyed by Vorth attacks because physical construction was something that reminded him of the positive aspects of human nature instead of the violence that had consumed his life for so long. Ken Tony Mitchell and the surviving crews of the ghost ships found it hard to adjust to a world where they were no longer needed to carry out desperate missions behind enemy lines. Some of them joined the merchant fleet that was beginning to explore the galaxy beyond human space, while others became teachers who trained the next generation of human soldiers who would defend the colonies that were being rebuilt stronger than before. Dr. Susan Clark published her complete study of Vorth biology and technology, which revealed that the alien empire had conquered over 200 different species during their expansion across the galaxy. Humanity was the first race to not only resist Vorth conquest, but to inflict total defeat upon them and drive them away from territory they had claimed as their own. Her work became required reading for human explorers venturing into unknown regions of space. The war's end brought unexpected consequences that nobody had predicted. When the fighting was still going on because other alien species throughout the galaxy had heard about humanity's victory over the Vorth Empire, races that had been enslaved for centuries began rebelling against their oppressors using tactics they had learned from studying human military broadcasts that had been intercepted during the war. The once mighty Vorth Empire began fragmenting as subject races realized that their masters could be defeated by enemies who were willing to fight hard enough and long enough to find weaknesses in systems that had seemed invincible. The galaxy was changing in ways that would take decades to fully understand, but humanity had started something that could not be stopped by any force the Empire could bring to bear. In the years following the war's end, human colonies began rebuilding. With new technologies developed from captured Vorth equipment and lessons learned during years of desperate fighting, the settlements were stronger and more unified than they had been before the invasion, because shared suffering had created bonds between people that would last for generations to come. Admiral Lisa Thompson retired to a small farm on Earth where she could watch the stars without wondering what hostile forces might be hiding among them. She had commanded the defense of human space during its darkest hour, and she knew that her decisions had saved billions of lives, but the weight of command during wartime had left scars that would never fully heal. The memorial to the war's dead was built on Freedom Station, where Commander Scott Johnson had proved that humans could defeat the Vorth if they were willing to fight with everything they had. The names of everyone who had died defending human space were carved into black stone that reflected the light of distant stars and reminded visitors that freedom always came at a price that good people were willing to pay. Dr. Linda Martinez continued her research into alien technology, but now she worked to develop medical devices instead of weapons because the war had shown her enough of what humans could destroy, and she wanted to spend the rest of her life helping them build something better. Her electromagnetic pulse devices were redesigned to help doctors treat patients with cybernetic implants. Instead of disabling enemy soldiers, the story concluded aboard the exploration vessel UES Horizon, which was commanded by Captain Amy Rodriguez, who had been the young communications officer aboard the Defiance when the war began. Her ship was approaching the edge of known space-carrying diplomats and scientists instead of soldiers because humanity was ready to meet the galaxy as explorers rather than warriors. Amy stood on the bridge looking at words carved into the metal bulkhead that said "Never again" in simple letters that every member of her crew could read and understand. The phrase had become humanity's promise to itself that no enemy would ever again threaten human freedom without facing the full fury of a species that had learned what it could accomplish when ordinary people decided to do extraordinary things. As the horizon crossed into unexplored space, Amy thought about the war that had ended 3 years ago and the peace that had followed. Humanity had emerged from the conflict, not as conquerors seeking to build their own empire, but as the species that had proved even the mightiest force in the galaxy could fall to people who refused to accept slavery or death as their only choices when faced with impossible odds.